Labor is a topic that we're going to be discussing throughout the day, weighing the costs and benefits of automation on human workers. There's no better place to start this discussion than the Department of Labor. U.S. Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh is joining us now to talk about jobs, manufacturing, and what companies and regulators can do to better prepare us for an automated future. Please welcome Secretary Walsh. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. As somebody who covers this space closely, I can attest to the fact that we tend to talk to a lot of founders and roboticists who have a very rosy view when it comes to technology's impact on the workforce. These past few years have demonstrated that automation is an inevitability. So now is, I think, the time to ask some difficult questions about how it's going to shape the future of human labor. I'm excited to be joined by the United States Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, who has both a strong background in organized labor, as well as some very close ties to the city of Boston as its former mayor. Secretary Walsh, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to have this conversation, and thanks for the topic.
Yeah, likewise. So the first subject that everyone, I think, rightfully discusses around automation is its impact on the workforce. Is job loss inevitable?
Well, I think when I think of automation, the first thing you can't be fearful of it. You can't worry about what the future of automation is going to look like. I'll take you back real quickly to my time as mayor of Boston in 2014. One of the first things we did was bring autonomous vehicles to the city to figure out how the autonomous vehicles world works. And we were really thinking innovatively in the city of Boston. We were transitioning from a 20-year mayor to a new administration. And we thought about how that's going to move forward. We went out, we tried to attract innovative companies to the city of Boston. We went out and attracted Mass Robotics. They actually set up their shop on a city-owned property. And they were talking about growth and building. And I think that it will impact the workforce if cities and towns and workforce development boards and people don't prepare for the future. And what I mean by that is we were forward looking in the city of Boston, making sure as we thought about innovation, it does bring jobs and it brings different types of jobs. And how do we make sure people are skilled up and trained up to actually access those jobs? If you don't do that, then obviously it's going to have an impact on people. If you don't have a workforce that is, or developing a workforce that is thinking innovatively down the road, because jobs is still going to be created in this space. And I think that that's something that you have to do as whether it's a mayor, a county official, a governor, a federal government, even companies. There's opportunity for us to really think differently outside the box and take advantage of automation in the sense of creating actually new jobs and, quite honestly, in some cases, better paying jobs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I talked to a lot of roboticists around this topic, and the consensus seems to be that this technology is ultimately, as you said, going to create new and perhaps better jobs over time. But I do fear that a lot of times the discussion tends to ignore the very real and immediate impact on blue-collar workers. I do think that, ultimately some of those jobs are going to be lost in the short term. How do we protect those workers?
Well, there's been a lot of fears about automation for quite a bit now. I've been in politics now for 25 years, and for 25 years, we've been talking about automation replacing people. And in some cases, it has changed the workplace. I was in Detroit with the president at a GM facility. And we happened to talk to a technician that was there, and it was a woman, and she had been working for GM for 15 years. And when she started, she worked with wrenches. And when she started, she got dirty every day. And fast forward to 2021, a lot more technology. They're building the Hummer. It was the Hummer plant. And she was working on computers and working on how do they put the same vehicle together, but in a very different way. And she didn't lose her job. We didn't see a downsizing in the workforce. But obviously, again, if we don't prepare workers right now, we don't stop preparing workers for this technology change, even though we're not sure what the technology is, then we will see reductions in workforce across the country in some cases. And I think that, we have to be very cognizant. I think of my role now as Secretary of Labor, when I think about creating pathways and workforce development programs, I do think back on my time as mayor, and I think look to the future. If we don't start looking to the future as a government, and we don't start looking to the future as industries, then what you just asked me, we'll be having a very different conversation next 5 to 10 years. There's a unique opportunity at this moment in time to make sure we're making the right investments in these industries, and also partnering with these industries. If we don't partner with these industries and understand what they're creating, what they're building, and what their thought process is, again, I was at a UPS factory in Louisville, Kentucky, and they use a lot of technology down there now. I mean, with the machinery and the labeling and getting things moving forward, having those opportunities. But still, there are still people there working. There's still people there sorting. There's still people there making sure the machines are running. There's still people there driving. So we just need to make sure, as the technology even gets more advanced, and I think we're heading towards a more advanced technological world here in the next probably 5 to 10 years. We just need, me in my role now, we just need to continue to make sure we're investing in people.
Yeah, I think you alluded to this in your first answer, and ultimately what we're talking about here is training, what companies call upscaling. Ultimately, when it does come down to that, to training workers, who does the onus who does it fall on? Is it the federal government? Is it the companies doing the automation? Whose job is it to actually to educate people to be able to take these new roles?
Well, historically, I think it's fallen on workforce boards and things like that in local authorities. But to be honest with you, what we're experiencing now, not post-pandemic, towards hopefully post-pandemic, we're seeing lots of high people leaving their jobs looking for better opportunities. I think companies need to invest more in their workforces and in potential workforces, because they're the ones who this is their opportunity to create a workforce that works for them. And I think that we see this public-private partnership to some degree is important, but I think companies are going to start investing more in people, in human capital, because what they want is that loyalty to the brand, that loyalty to the company, and that opportunity to say that this company gave you an opportunity to earn a good living. And I think, back in the 50s and 60s, there was some investment by companies in people, and we got away from that for a little bit. And I think to be successful, if I ran a tech company or an innovative company, and I was moving forward to do more automation, I certainly would want to put aside a pot of money to make investments in people, because I would want to make sure the folks that I'm bringing onto my office are trained the way I need them to be trained and skilled up the way I need them to be skilled up. But there is a role for government as well. I mean, I'm not dodging the question. Government needs to, I think we need to look at the way we invest also in workforce development and make sure that the partnerships that we're investing, that we're putting the money into good training programs, maybe community colleges and job corps centers and places like that.
Yeah, and even beyond that, obviously best case scenario for most of these roles is that we're able to bring this education to people early on, so that they're prepared for these changes even before they enter the workforce. Do you feel at this point that the government is doing a good enough job bringing this kind of early STEM education to underserved communities?
I think we have to do a lot better job. I mean, I'll go back to Boston. We have the Dearborn STEM Academy in Roxbury that was renovated when I was the mayor, and we're making investments. And what we need to do is partner high schools, don't be afraid of it, partner high schools with companies and creating that pathway into jobs. I mean, if you're a company and you're looking for a skilled, qualified workforce, you're obviously looking for it today, but you also got to invest in the future. And I think that we have to do a much better job. As I travel around the country, and I've been to high schools and programs, a program in a district that has great STEM education, that's one program in one district, when in fact, we really should be thinking about this in all of our high schools. Just like back in the day, people talked about woodworking and mechanical engineering, not engineering, mechanics and shop in high schools. We need to change those trade schools or reinvent those trade schools into more tech focused moving forward, STEM education, to get young people that experience of what it means. What does STEM education mean? I mean, every young person knows how to take out their smartphone and they can do whatever they want with that phone, but they need to take it a little further than that. And I think really having cities and towns, if you're a city and you're a mayor and you're thinking about the future of your city and you're thinking about really advancing your city forward, that's where you need to make the investment in the high school level. And honestly, probably even before high school, probably in the grade school level at this point, you probably got to get kids involved a lot younger. And indirectly, you will catch the communities of color. I mean, historically, communities of color have been left behind. So you take a district like Boston that has 54,000 kids, 80% of those kids are kids of color that come out of African American, Latino, and other immigrant community races. Having those families, having those kids exposed to that idea early on, where their parents were construction workers or homemakers or working in different industries. That's really the way to think about educating the future.
Yeah, and I do think to a certain extent, I think an effort needs to be made specifically to target those communities. And I think part of the disconnect here is that, people from children in wealthier districts tend to get access to a lot of extracurriculars that other students get. And, that's where I think that initial love of technology comes from, is these projects, like First Robotics, for example, that you're doing outside of school.
Yeah, you're right. And you think about, like, when I think about we've had kind of a boom in the city of Boston, quite honestly, in Texas, and it was in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco, now and out in California. Now it's shifting to other parts of the country. And when you walk into these offices, you see mostly white young people that went to good colleges or what have you. And there's a whole group of folks out there, a whole group of young people, kids of color, that haven't had those opportunities and have not opened those doors. And again, I think the work has to be intentional. And I think that, a lot of folks today are talking about diversity. They're talking about creating equal pathways. Well, that's great. I commend you for that. But it's more than talking now. So it has to be investments made both by companies and by innovators into the space, but also, and not just having a program where you're exposing somebody to a summer camp on technology. It's about, how do you make sure they have a year-round experience, whether they're summer job program that goes into a winter program and things like that. I mean, you have to open up the doors for people. When I was in, I think I missed you, but when Mass Robotics had a celebration a couple of months ago, I went to it, I think their couple year opening anniversary, I think it was. And they had some young people there one was from Dearborn STEM Academy and one was from Madison Park, historically communities of color in the city. And they were exposing young people to this opportunity to work in the tech sector. And that's great, but now you got to scale it up, because there's a whole untapped workforce in America that has not been tapped into, that are just hungry for opportunity. And I think that will make the difference.
You and Vice President Harris met with the Amazon union back in May. Do you anticipate a broader push towards unionizing among Amazon and other warehouse workers in the face of increased automation?
Actually, I think it was Google. It was the Google workers when we met them at the event in May. And I think that, I think there's a couple of things here. I think that you're going to see a lot more unionization in some of these companies, but it's not just about unionization. It's making sure that the unions, I think that companies that are unionized by tech companies that get unionized, once they get through the initial shock of the organizing and they work through a contract, I think then there needs to be a pathway on how do we work towards job training. Because when you think about a union, when I think about a union, and I ran the building trades in Boston, it wasn't just about representing the members that are in my association. It was about making sure that we expand and grow. And the way you do that in 2022 is by partnerships. And if you make these companies successful, meaning whether it's if Amazon get organized or Google gets organized or whatever company it might be, they need to continue to grow and be successful. And it needs to be more of a partnership. And I honestly feel that when I think about the labor movement, people have to think more of a partnership rather than maybe obstacles the wrong word, but whatever I'm trying to say here, there's an opportunity that I think that we have to. So when we met with those workers, with the vice president, they were talking about the reason, though, I think it was 3 women we met with, and they were talking about some of the concerns they had in the pay structure, that they were being underpaid. They were doing work as much as anyone else in the company. And then they formed a union, and they were I think it was Google, and they wanted to get better opportunities for that. We didn't get into a deeper conversation about what's the next step.
Yeah, more broadly, when I look at, again, Amazon is top of mind for a few reasons, but even Starbucks, when we see this unionizing push across the country, in a lot of cases, perhaps in most cases, companies tend to be antagonistic towards a union.
Yeah.
How do you resolve that?
Well, I think it's the unknown. I often say to people, even when you have a contract dispute and it gets to a point where it's a strike and it gets nasty, oftentimes people can't see beyond the conflict in front of them when in fact they're really not that far apart. And I think the labor movement, and I've said this to some people in the labor movement, you need to explain what you are proposing and explain how you're moving forward. Just like a group of workers, whether it's in Starbucks or it's in REI or it's in Amazon, they organize for a reason. They organized because they felt that they were either not being appreciated, they felt they were being underpaid, they felt that the workplace was unsafe, whatever reasons they organized, and they organized for a whole bunch of different reasons. There's an opportunity to, once they get to a point where there's a contract. Now, those three are still negotiating contracts, but let's assume for a minute that they settle a contract. Let's assume somebody who's organizing in the United States today gets a contract with their employer. That's where the relationship should really start thinking about, how do you, as a joint partner, advance the company forward, rather than try to slow down the progress of the company. How do you make sure the company is successful? And that really is what the labor movement has to do a little better job of doing, selling to not just to the members, they represent the members, but to the leadership of the company, that we're not in here to slow you down and put you out of business. We're in here to make you successful, because the bigger you get or the more people you have working for you is the more people I get to represent as a union. So I think it's about having those conversations. I've talked to some folks that have been, resistance, I guess, if you will, of having a union coming in. I've talked to the unions of going in and trying to take people over. And I tell all sides, have the dialogue, because you don't understand the similarities you have until you have a conversation. And then you can work out your differences. And more often than not, the differences are far fewer than the actual agreements.
So you don't feel that the push to, better the state for these workers through unions is necessarily in opposition to companies' desire to increasingly automate their functions?
No, it's a little different. I mean, I think when you think about, in the case of Amazon, they're already automated. I mean, they use technology. I mean, I have not gone to an Amazon facility yet to actually do a tour of one. I'd love to go and see what they're doing there. I was in the UPS facility. It's pretty automated in there. The packages come in, they go through the conveyor belts, and then they end up off the conveyor belt, and they end up on the truck, and they end up on our front door. And they go on a plane sometimes there. So again, I think that when you're thinking about the automation, I want to say, in the factory in Louisville, I want to say there was almost, I don't know the numbers, there was thousands of workers in there. And you walk in and it's predominantly automated system that moves the packages around, but there was thousands of workers that needed to support the work that was there. And again, I think that there's other opportunities for jobs. I know that I guess the understanding is automation means loss of jobs. And if you look at the bottom line, I guess in some ways you can come up with a rationale that it would mean that, but there's still a need for human capital in those facilities, and there's still an opportunity for human jobs in those facilities. And I think that, again, learning the automation, learning what that means, and there's different types of, as you know better than I do, there's different types of automation. There's conveyor belt and that type of automation. Then you go to a factory. I was at GE. I saw them work at GE. I was at a Tesla factory. I saw them work at Tesla. Something, there was very little difference between the GE factory and the Tesla factory as far as workers and automation. It was pretty much the same thing. There was thousands of people working in each of those facilities. So there's still going to be a big need for workers. What we're doing right now, I mean, the automation of the industry of the press. And you and I are in a Zoom. Normally we'd be in a room together. There'd be a lot of people with cameras and lights and setting up and breaking down. But with the adjustment, there's people to need to set up the Zoom and put the Zoom together. I have 3 people in front of me setting the Zoom up. So there wasn't a loss of jobs in this interview.
So on the note of sort of broader job loss in the U.S., according to the Economic Policy Institute, nearly 5 million manufacturing jobs were lost between 1997 and 2020. It's due in part to the shutdown of more than 9,000 plants. Ultimately, what role can automation play in returning manufacturing jobs to the U.S.?
Well, I think we have a bill, hopefully, that's going through Congress in the next couple of days, the Innovation Act, the CHIPS bill, that will allow us the opportunity to bring more manufacturing jobs to the United States of America. These are going to be factories that are going to be built from scratch. So you're going to see a lot of automation in those factories. You're seeing, if you go to the ports, you're seeing automation when they renovate the ports. They're changing in some automation. Now, when I say automation, people freak out about the word. I'm not talking about replacing longshoremen and women on the ports. I'm talking about better equipment for technology to be able to take the products off the ship. When you start thinking about if this chips bill moves forward, we're talking about, tens of billions of dollars in new factories built all across America, producing products that are going to be sold here in the United States of America. They're going to go into our cars and our computers and our phones and all of that. So I think that there's unique opportunities here. These jobs don't exist today. So over the last 50 years, we lost, I don't know what the number was, millions of manufacturing jobs in the United States of America. We don't do as much manufacturing as we used to. So for every job we add back, as of right now, as of last Friday, we were able to add every job lost through the pandemic is back to full capacity in the United States of America when it comes to manufacturing. So every job we add, whether it's one job or 100 jobs or 500 jobs, whatever it might be, every job from this point forward is new jobs added to our economy when it comes to manufacturing.
So you're bullish when it comes to the future of manufacturing in the U.S.?
I am. I think that we have, when you think about where we are at this moment in time, a lot of people are talking about inflation. Inflation is driven by a bunch of different things, but a couple of the main reasons are that we're dealing with inflationary pressures right now. Probably the biggest reason, in my opinion, is the pandemic and what the pandemic did to manufacturing imports from other parts of the world into the United States of America and didn't have those products readily available. We saw the cost of prices go up for that because the goods weren't here. We are so dependent on foreign imports in our country to get our cars moving from everything, where we used to build that ourselves. And not necessarily the chips, but we need to start thinking more about being more dependent on manufacturing in the United States of America, more dependent on American workers building our products. It does a couple of things. Number one, it creates good jobs for people to get opportunities for people to create the product. And secondly, quite honestly, it will bring the cost down in the long run. I mean, if the chips bill passed today, inflation is not going to go away tomorrow. But when we think about a recession down the road in 10 years from now, whenever that might be, creating more opportunities for products here in the United States, we're far better being more dependent on creating our own supply.
I want to get back to something you said earlier when you were discussing this effectively Zoom call that we're having right now. Even some of the leading edge tech firms have pushed back against an all remote workforce over the last year or two. Ultimately, are these companies shooting themselves in the foot by requiring employees to return to the office? No,
I don't think so. I think, I've spent a lot of time. I've kind of come full circle in my brain on returning back to work. When I was the mayor in March 17th of 2020, we basically went all remote. The only people that came into the office were the folks in the mayor's office because we were doing crisis response to the pandemic, and our essential personnel were out in the street. And I thought at some point we need to get everyone back in the office. And I got selected to be Secretary of Labor. And when I think about our office, there are opportunities in our office that people can work from home. And there are definitely opportunities where I'd like to see more people in the office. I think companies are figuring that out. I'm not sure what work's going to look like in the next 5 years in America. I think there's going to be some at home and there's going to be some in the office. There's nothing like having people, though, sitting around a table talking about ideas and moving forward. So I think people are going to come up with hybrids. I've talked to financial institutions, some financial institutions, big ones in the United States of America, like you have their credit card in your pocket. Some have said they've gone to, kind of hybrid where people come into work for 3-4 days a week. The productivity has gone up. The employee satisfaction has gone up. And there's opportunities to make sure you're still doing your job and delivering a product or delivering services to the customer. Other companies want to have people in 5 days a week and they're demanding they come in 5 days a week. And we'll see how that plays out for them. But I think that the flexibility in the workplace, flexibility is kind of tied to the gig economy. Flexibility was something that employers have done for a long time, and it was kind of stolen by the gig economy to say, we're flexible. No, companies have been flexible for decades. And I think a lot of companies now are looking at that flexibility and how does it work into our business model.
So I'm going to ask you a really big question with about a minute and a half left. I see the pandemic as effectively decentralizing a lot of these startup hubs. I'm in New York, San Francisco, Boston, for example. As the mayor of one of those cities, as the former mayor of one of those cities, how can urban centers retain top talent in an era of remote work?
Well, I think first of all, young people still want to be in urban America, and I haven't seen a study yet to say that doesn't happen. And I think that when I thought about retaining, like Boston didn't always retain our college students. College students came to Boston, they got educated, they went to Silicon Valley, they went to New York City, they went other places. They didn't stay in the city. And when you think about, as a mayor, how do you retain people? It is about a work-life balance. How do you make the city as desirable for people who want to stay here, making sure you have more green pathways to walk, making sure you have bike lanes, making sure you have things like outdoor dining, making sure you have opportunities that excite people to come into the city. That when you think of an employee, when I think of a young person that is going to make a decision where to live and work, I mean, young people don't want to sit in a suburban house or somewhere in America and just sit there. They want to be where the action is, and the action is in downtown areas, and whatever your natural resource is, whether it's woods or whether it's the ocean, you take advantage and use those opportunities. And that's what I would do if I was a mayor now. I'd be like, how do you continue to keep people? I base some of my success on when I went around the city of Boston. I saw young people, where they're from, and in my time as mayor, I would hear Ohio, I'd hear Alabama, I'd hear New York City, I'd hear California. That's a sign of success, meaning young people are getting educated in your city and you're attracting them to your city. And that overall helps the ecosystem of a city, and also helps the ecosystem of a company to have real good competition to be able to hire people.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of ground to cover here, and we could spend a lot more time talking about it. It was an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we can do this in person in Boston or Washington, D.C. one of these days.
Yeah, let's do it in Boston. No offense to Washington. Let's do it in Boston.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Thank
Secretary.
you.